Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Everyone, there are 44 on the line. Thank you so much for being here. We're excited about this content. I am Lori Ponce. I'm director of the Coalition for a Strong Nebraska. We're glad to have you here today for nonprofits and Nebraska redistricting, what you need to know and how to get involved. It's coming up. The data is quickly becoming available, and special session will be starting probably in a month or so. So it's here. We need to learn as much as we can so we can keep a close watch over the process, as I'm expecting it to be somewhat divisive and political. So let's get started. As many of you know, Lisa Sock, who is a consultant who has been active in a number of advocacy projects in Nebraska through the years, and I'm lucky enough that she is now helping CSN with some of our projects, and she's going to be moderator today. So without further ado, I'll let you take it away, Lisa.
Thank you, Lori. And thank you all for joining us for this important conversation. As Lori stated, the legislature will convene a special session from mid to late September to redraw legislative and congressional districts, potentially changing how Nebraskans are represented in the legislature and Congress. We thought it was important to bring everybody together today to learn about the process because it's critical for every Nebraskan to know about the process, what it means for their representation, and how they can be involved. Nonprofits have an important role to play in this process, and to help guide us in what we need to know and how we can participate, we've asked a group of experts to share more with you. So today we're joined by Dr. Stephen Dunbar, who is Professor Emeritus in the Department of Mathematics at UNL. Gavin Geis is the Executive Director of Common Cause Nebraska. We're also joined by Creighton Heffer, an organizer at Common Cause Nebraska. Sherry St. Clair from the amazing League of Women Voters will be sharing some great information with you. Weston Miller is the Director of Public Policy at Civic Nebraska and will be sharing more about his perspective and observations about the process thus far and where we think it's going to go. And Melissa Brazil is the Communications Director at the Nebraska Civic Engagement Table and will be providing some communications tools that you all may want to consider using. Before we get started, I just want to touch on a few housekeeping items. Please feel free to use the chat box for any questions you would like to ask of the presenters. I'll be moderating the chat box and can ask the question for you. But if you would like to ask a question directly, instead of using the chat box, just type, I have a question in the chat box and I will call on you. Please also stay on mute unless you would like to ask a question. This will just help all of us stay focused and avoid any background noise. Lori will also voluntarily mute you if that background noise, if you can't find the mute button fast enough. So we can just stay focused today. Also, as you know, we are recording this morning's conversation. We'll make it available to CSN members, and we'll also be sharing the recording and other materials with registrants for today's meeting in the coming days. So now I'll turn it over to Dr. Dunbar.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me today. This is a real pleasure and an honor. So let's see, I'm going to see if I can share my screen. Let's hope it works. Let's see here. Okay, I think I need to share that one. And let's see here.
We can see it, Dr. Dunbar. Thank you.
You can. Okay. Yes. I'm going to bring it up into presentation mode. Okay. And then I need to go up a couple of, okay. So again, let's begin here at the beginning, say it's Redistricting 2021, and this is a presentation for the Coalition for a Strong Nebraska. Again, thank you for inviting me. So let me give you a little bit of background. I'll explain more why a mathematician is talking to you today about redistricting. In the last, approximately 4 years, 3 years even, redistricting has become a subject for really interesting mathematical investigation for some reasons that I'll show you why in a little while. A lot of this is collaboration with another mathematician, my friend Christy Faby, who is professor at Nebraska Wesleyan and former student from UNL. So I want to say that many of the ideas that I'm presenting today have been hammered out in collaboration with Christy. So I want to thank her. She wasn't able to be here today, but okay. So let me tell you what the outline and the goals, what I'm going to tell you in the next few minutes are. I'm going to assume that everyone has a basic understanding of redistricting and gerrymandering. This is a pretty knowledgeable audience, and so I won't go into some of that. I'll touch on it very briefly from the political end, and then talk about those things. The other thing, the main thing that I want to do today is point out several new web resources that have just appeared actually in the last week that track redistricting in each state. The important thing is that they use mathematical methods. And my goal is to first point out those resources to you and then give you some introduction and some background on the methods that they're using, so you'll understand on a broad scale from, you know, the 30,000 foot level, what it is they're doing and how they're doing it and why they're doing it. So that's where we're headed. Okay, so let me talk about redistricting in Nebraska first. This is, I'm sure, well known. We'll be drawing three new congressional districts. Here's a map of the existing 2011 congressional districts, three of them, according to the apportionment data that we got earlier this year. We'll be drawing 49 legislative districts. Here's a map. The three little insets down there at the bottom are the metro areas for Omaha with its many small, geographically small legislative districts, Lincoln in the middle and Grand Island over there on the left. So that's, I'm sure, foremost on everybody's mind, those two redistrictings that'll be taking place. There are some others, of course, that we will be getting 6 Supreme Court judicial districts, 8 State Board of Education districts, 8 Board of Regents districts, 5 Public Service Commission districts. All of those are important too, of course, but I think everyone's attention will be focused on the congressional districts and the legislative districts. So, okay. The Nebraska Constitution, Article 3, Section 5, and the U.S. Constitution set some requirements for redistricting. Again, I'm sure that this is pretty well known to all of you. The districts must be compact. The districts must be contiguous, which is to say that there's no separated islands or holes in districts, that sort of thing. They must be equal population. In Nebraska, they must follow county lines whenever practicable. And of course, any redistricting must satisfy the existing parts of the Voting Rights Act from 1964. So those are the basic rules that have to be followed for redistricting. On May 18th of this very year, legislative resolution 134 was passed that sets some additional boundaries on the redistricting for Nebraska now in 2021. First of all of the previous requirements must be met. This legislative resolution also calls for the redistricting to preserve communities of interest, but it doesn't define what that means. It calls on the preservation of cores of prior districts, but also it doesn't define exactly what that means. A little more substantially, it allows for a 1% population deviation for congressional districts. So achieving absolute equality of population for districts is essentially mathematically impossible. So the population can deviate by as much as 1% for the 3 congressional districts and up to 10% for the legislative districts. So those are the guidelines that we have for redistricting and coming up in the next month. Okay, and here now I'm going to move on to my main point. If there's anything to take away from my little presentation today, it's going to be the next couple of slides, the next 3 slides. In 2018, actually, it was argued before the Supreme Court. The decisions came down in the summer of 2019. It was a case was Rucho versus Common Cause. It was about the gerrymandering of North Carolina and whether gerrymandering would be justiciable in the federal courts. It came down to a 5-4 decision, and the majority opinion was that partisan gerrymandering is not justiciable. That is to say, can't be tried at the federal court level. But Justice Kagan wrote a dissent, which I highly recommend to everyone to read. I've never read a Supreme Court opinion before in my life. This was the first one. It was terrific. And I would say in 4 years of study on this issue, it's the single best summary I've read about gerrymandering. And second, I would say it includes the best single summary of the mathematical and statistical ideas that I'm going to be talking about in a few minutes. So if there's only one thing to look for this dissent, which you can find on the Supreme Court's website. So I'm going to take a little bit away from this. First of all, the two-part takeaway. So here's takeaway part one. That is that computer applications make gerrymandering easy, and that's in italics. And the quote from Justice Kagan is that today's map makers can generate thousands of possibilities at the touch of a key and then choose the one that gives their party maximum advantage. So that's one side of this. The other takeaway, part two, it's the flip side of the coin. And that is that mathematical ideas that have been developed in the last 3 years detect gerrymandering. And that is that the same technologies and the same data that today facilitate that extreme partisan gerrymandering also enable courts through mathematicians and statisticians and computer scientists and data scientists and everyday citizens to discover them by exposing just how much they dilute those votes. So the takeaway is that it's possible to gerrymander, but the same thing that allows that to happen is also the evidence that shows that it's occurring. And so I want to walk through that a little bit and show you how that works. Okay, before I do that, I'm going to mention on this slide, here are some resources that are just now available really this week. They're using mathematical methods behind this. And I'm going to have a repeat of this slide, and I've given the slides to Lisa Sock, the organizer, and I think she's going to be able to redistribute these. So you don't have to write these down. No need to scribble. It'll come back to you soon. So, okay, the first one is 538's Redistricting Tracker, which is at the 538 website. All about redistricting, which comes from the Loyola Law School, the Princeton Gerrymandering Group, and actually the group that got me involved in this, the Metric Geometry and Gerrymandering Group, which is out of Tufts University and MIT in the Boston area. And they are the most mathematical of these, Princeton a little less. They're sort of in order of increasing mathematics there. But those are some resources that use these mathematical methods. So you can look it up, do a little research behind it. I'll show you one of these at the end of my talk real quickly here. Okay, so I'm going to walk through a little example. Maybe many of you have seen this before, but let me walk through it quickly. Let's suppose that we have a little city. I like to call it Rectangle City. Rectangle City has 50 citizens, and our goal is to divide these 50 citizens into 5 districts of 10 people each. So there's 5 city council seats for Rectangle City, and they want to have equal population. Now, Rectangle City is divided. It's got the orange party that lives on the east side of the city, and it's got the purple party that lives on the west side of the city. And we'd like to divide these up. Notice that it's 40% purple, 60% orange, and we're going to be creating 5 city council seats or 5 districts for this little rectangle city. So one way we could do it is imagine that the orange party has control of the districting process. They can gerrymander these 5 districts by what's called cracking, which is to say you take the losing party, in this case the minority, the purple party, and you thinly distribute them over the seats available. And so if you draw these little horizontal stripes, 5 horizontal stripes with 10 each, 5 by 2, you'll see that in each district there's 6 orange voters, 4 purple voters, and so orange can win all 5 seats with an extreme gerrymander in this way. On the other hand, if purple has the district drawing power, they can gerrymander the orange into 2 districts with unnecessary supermajorities. That's called packing, where you pack a lot of the voters into a couple of districts with as few as you can. So let me just draw these out. I hope you can see my mouse here. there's a long snaky district over here on the east that has 9 orange and 1 purple. Orange would win that. Here's another long snaky district with 9 orange and 1 purple. Orange would win that. But purple has been very cleverly sliced up 6, 6, and 6. So they actually win 3 of the seats, even though they only have 40% of the voters. So this is the alternate method of gerrymandering, of packing. Okay, so there's yet other ways to do this. You can meet the requirements, make some compact, contiguous, equal population districts. And this would be one possibility. And here's one where orange wins 3. So there are 2, 4, 6, there are 8 orange voters here, they win this district, but there's 6 purple, they win this district. The orange wins this one right through the middle. Orange wins this one down here, purple wins this. So here orange wins 3, purple wins 2, and we've satisfied all of the conditions. Okay, so here's several different ways to divide up just even this simple little city of rectangle city. It turns out that there's over 113 million ways, legal ways to do this. And so here's the way you do this mathematical districting with statistics that's behind these websites that I talked about a few moments ago. What you do is you make lots of valid maps. Typically, you make in the range of 20,000 to 100,000 or even more of these legal maps, and you line them up by some outcome. In this case, the outcome that I'm going to take is how many seats or how many districts does orange win. If you do this, I've only illustrated the 4 that I've talked about here, but if you did this for 20,000 to 100,000 maps, you would find that orange winning 3 districts is fairly common. In this little example that I've got here, it's 2 out of the 4, reasonably common. Orange winning 5 districts is extremely unusual, and you can statistically measure how unusual that is. The unusual outcomes are probably carefully crafted, which is, I like that phrase. It's a little softer, a little nicer than gerrymandering. But anyway, unusual outcomes can be spotted with this statistical method of creating a number of maps and then looking to see how they measure up on various electoral measures. That's basically the method that's behind these websites. Okay, we're going to have some pressure points in Nebraska. I'm sure some of the other folks will be talking about these. I just want to say quickly that we know that there's been a population shift over the last 10, even several decades, 10 years, several decades, population shift to the urban counties. Right now, 56% of the Nebraska population lives in 3 counties, Douglas, Sarpy, and Lancaster. If you count that out, that means that there's 27 legislative seats ought to emerge from those counties, and that will affect the boundaries of the congressional districts too. So that's going to be a pressure point as the redistricting goes forward, and we'll have to watch that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about those resources again. The Nebraska legislature redistricting site, which I did not mention before, is now up. It will have some of the data that they will be using, they being the legislature and the redistricting committee will be using for their redistricting. Again, I mentioned 538's redistricting tracker. There's metric geometry and gerrymandering group, all about redistricting, and the Princeton gerrymandering group. Let me show you, let's see here. Let's see if I can bring this up. Yeah, okay, this is 538. I'm looking at the Nebraska tracker on the 538 website. They've noted here, obviously, that Nebraska hasn't approved a new congressional map yet, but they'll update it as soon as they get some information. They do have some things about the old map. And they mentioned they've got these lined up by majority, indicating the majorities and what will happen in the new map. So there's a way to do it. But the thing I want to point out here is down here at the bottom, they've got 3 additional mathematical measures. There's a median seat measure, an efficiency gap measure, and a competitiveness gap measure. These are a little bit more sophisticated statistical measures of an electoral district's. Well, it's another measure of an electoral district. I was using a very simple one, namely the number of seats won. That's pretty crude. These are a lot finer measures and get a little bit more closely at what's going on. So there's also some additional information here, but I just wanted to point out that these sites, let's see, I've also got the Princeton site up. They've got here like tests failed, vote share, seat share, a couple of other measures. Seat share is essentially what I was doing with this little rectangle city a few moments ago. But you can take a look, and then they give some information on how they generate these tests and some of the statistics that go behind it. So that's a little bit of the tracking that you can do and the way that it goes behind it. I think that covers everything that I had. I'm gonna let's see if I can get back to everything here. And
while you do that, Dr. Dunbar, I'll just ask if anybody has any questions. This is I'm getting a number of messages of people that are saying this is really great information. Okay. Does anybody have any questions of Dr. Dunbar? Yes, Mickey.
Yeah, I had a quick question about, so I understand sort of running the statistics. What are there ways to run them multiply against each other? Because I know they'll want to look at like different variables, like are we doing a racial gerrymander versus a partisan gerrymander or things like that. So can they run the statistical models so that you're sort of controlling for both of those things at once, or like how does that work?
Actually, you can run these measures one at a time. To measure two things simultaneously gets really tricky. That's that's tricky, difficult statistics. But they can be run one at a time. I mean, as much any information that you've got available, you can use that information for a statistical test. It's been done. I know the metric geometry and gerrymandering group ran these kinds of statistical tests on Virginia for a racial gerrymandering case in Virginia. I think that was either 2018, 2019. It's also been run in Pennsylvania and in North Carolina on partisan gerrymandering. To do both at the same time would be, I think, a real tricky statistical puzzle. I think one at a time is plenty for me right at the moment. I guess I'll just say that.
Thank you. Anne, you have a question?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. This is great. I wonder, I guess basically, I want to make sure I'm understanding the Voting Rights Act as it stands currently correctly. Am I right to understand that racial gerrymandering is problematic to the US Supreme Court, but they don't care about partisan gerrymandering based on that 2019 case? Is that correct?
Yes, although partisan gerrymandering is still justiciable at the state court level. In fact, after Rucho was struck down at the Supreme Court level, they went back within a couple of months to the state Supreme Court of North Carolina, and it got struck down. So partisan gerrymandering can be tried or adjudicated, whatever, at the state court level, but not at the federal court level. Racial gerrymandering can still be done tried at the federal court level. I think some of the other folks on this panel can probably answer that a lot better than I can. So you might ask that question again, but that's my understanding of the two, where they can be tried and how.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions for Dr. Dunbar? If you have your hand up, I don't know if I can see it. Okay. Well, Dr. Dunbar, thank you so much. If you could stop sharing your screen.
Yeah, okay, there's the stop share. Okay,
there it is.
I'll mute.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Gavin Geis from Common Cause Nebraska, who, as you all likely know, Common Cause works on redistricting, gerrymandering, sort of around the clock. Gavin's going to talk about the process and timing of redistricting in Nebraska. So Gavin, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Lisa. So for start off, there was a question in the chat that I can give a little answer to was, do they conduct a racial impacts study over this stuff? No, not as of yet. There are some states that are more conscious of that. In Nebraska, that is not yet required. It'd be great, but not yet required. All right, let me jump over to my sharing. All right, so as Lisa said, I'm covering the area of what should we expect from redistricting in Nebraska? What does the process look like? How do we get involved? That sort of stuff. So to start with, the process in Nebraska is carried out where the primary authority in Nebraska is the legislature. They are the constitutional authority when it comes to redistricting. Now, they're helped quite a bit by the Legislative Research Office, which is housed in the legislature. And they basically go through the process alongside the legislature, helping them where needed. And Professor Dunbar covered a few of the districts, but so they'll be drawing all of the House of Representative districts, all of the legislative districts, as well as Supreme Court, Public Service Commission, Board of Education, and University of Nebraska regions. And as the professor rightly pointed out, the only two contentious ones will be legislative and representative, or at least that's the likely scenario. These other redrawn districts don't usually receive the same attention or care. There's not as much room to gerrymander or get partisan gain in those areas. So the maps to watch are those 3 congressional districts and then the 49 legislative districts. So the legislature in the year when we were district, which is always a year ending in 1. So every year ending in 1, which theoretically follows the redistricting, not the redistricting, the census, right? Every decennial census follows that. During that legislature, a committee is specifically formed as a 9-member committee put together by the Committee on Committees to oversee the process. That happened already this year at the beginning, not sort of the beginning of the year, right? During their original session. But unfortunately, as I'll get into, that process has been delayed a little bit this year. Normally, this would be drawn during the legislative session. This process would happen during a regular legislative session. But because of a delay in census data, it actually has to take place later this year during that special session, which was brought up. It is delayed quite a bit compared to what we would otherwise be used to. So as I said, the research office, first of all, you have the 9-member legislative committee that is in charge, but then the research office, who really is the rubber to the road of using the data, practically applying it, and getting usable maps out of it. So without the legislative research office, their work on this, the committee would kind of be lost. What the research office does is they, first of all, help the legislature use the data that we'll be receiving from the census office, import that into a set of software that allows them to generate these maps, to draw their own maps based on certain criteria, based upon their interests. And as Professor Dunbar noted, to draw thousands and thousands of maps fairly quickly and easily to align with different goals and values. Yeah, it's really very powerful software that goes down to the census block, right? The neighborhood block level that allows them to divide fairly quickly. Now, so as the process starts with the Legislative Research Office and this legislative committee, after they have created maps, they will then be sent to the entire floor, the entire legislature, for a vote that it follows normal means. This is not different in any way than your normal bill. So it'll go for your typical voting process. It can be vetoed. Just nothing you need to know in terms of weird, specific redistricting stuff. It's a regular bill. So moving along here is our committee for the year. As I said, this committee was formed during the original legislative session here in 2021. Our chairperson is Lou Lanahan. It's a fairly diverse committee, Republicans and Democrats. But this is the group of individuals that will be your primary, if you want to get engaged, you want to reach out, these are your primary touch point for sharing your opinions, for sharing your hopes for this. They will be directing 99% of what these maps look like. Once the rest of the legislature returns, there may be some back and forth from members of the entire body based on the draft maps that are created, but the entire body will not have say into those first maps, or at least shouldn't. These should be the primary point people. So our timeline. We are today, actually, August 12th. Today, the Census Bureau is releasing the set of data that Nebraska will use to redistrict. This data has had many dates of release. In the 2020, it wasn't sure exactly when we were going to get relevant census data. Now that we've gotten through most of 2021, the Census Bureau initially had said August 16th. You may have heard that date. It is now today, August 12th, where they will be sending what's called legacy census data. And for your purposes, what that means is it will need some additional processing. They're sending out this legacy census data today to all the states. Now, then from roughly August 23rd to 27th, that data will be, well, sorry, I jumped ahead there. It'll be ready for committee use in that week, hopefully. It will take them roughly 2 weeks to process this data to be used by the committee. As it's being sent over, it's an old format that isn't as adaptable and usable by the software they use. So the Legislative Research Office or potentially a contractor are going to help them process this data, make it fully usable. We could, as a state, wait until September for another data release that doesn't require that processing. That's all that processing has been done by the Census Bureau. But because of the needs of local redistricting timelines, that is cities, counties, other local boards that have specific timelines in their rules when it comes to redistricting. Because of the push of that and the delay that we've already experienced in census data and the redistricting timeline, we'll be using this initial legacy data, getting that as quickly as possible so we can get those final redistricting plans turned over to the cities, locals, and they can start their redistricting processes. But as I said, in 2020, everything was delayed. The Census Bureau wasn't able to gather data as quickly and as efficiently as they normally would. And so we are working on a 6-month delayed timeline at the very least. So then August, next dates here, August 30th, September 10th. This is the rough timeline for when the committee will be doing its work of drawing maps and holding a series of public meetings. Now, I say a lot of this is tentative because it depends on, first, when that legacy data gets fully processed. Does it take 2 weeks? Does it take 1 week? We don't know for sure how quickly they'll be able to process, but we've been told to. The other thing this depends on is then this September 13th through the 30th special session. They could theoretically push that special session back and start somewhere else other than the 13th, They could start later in September if the committee needs more time to draw district maps and hold public hearings. But if we stick to the strict schedule, not the strict schedule, but the schedule we've been given by the speaker, this 13th through the 30th, if that will be the actual session where they'll vote on these maps and discuss them, we can expect in that August 30 to September timeline, that 2-week period is when we'll actually see district maps, the drafts released to the public, and then a scheduled series of public hearings on those maps to give community feedback. So if you're looking at that, it's a tight timeline. From here until the end of September, it will be fast moving, which is, I know, not ideal, but it's what we're dealing with. So be ready for, if you want to follow this process, quick, hey, they just released the maps, get ready to talk about them. It will happen quickly. So moving forward, Professor Dunbar mentioned that there were some process rules implemented at the end of the session by the committee. And I just want to cover a few more elements of those that I think are important. So as he said, the bill itself is LR 134, if you want to go dig through it, but no reason to dig through it all if you're not super interested. First of all, it requires compact, contiguous districts, all those traditional norms of redistricting. Beyond that, it does include protections that we think are fairly important. It protects against districts that either favor one party or candidate. So it specifically includes language that disallows districts favoring a party or a candidate. with the hope, of course, of preventing that partisan gerrymandering. That is, as we've said, justiciable at the state level, not at the federal level, and honestly much more difficult to argue against as opposed to racial gerrymandering. Beyond favoring party or candidate, it also protects against the dilution of minority voting power. The hope there is to the other side of gerrymandering, that is that we don't dilute our communities in Nebraska that have minority voting power, that have a minority stake in elections and in electing representatives. So it protects against specifically diluting that power to elect and to vote for when we're looking at racial ethnic minorities. Also worth pointing out again here is that it includes the consideration of communities of interest and cores of prior districts. Now, an important distinction here, as Professor Dunbar also said, communities of interest is relatively vague. What we're talking about when we say community of interest is a neighborhood or maybe a small town, basically communities within communities, areas that we don't want to divide through the redistricting process. So we don't want to draw a line for a district right through the middle of a neighborhood in Lincoln or Omaha. It's important that they look at those types of testimony, that type of data when drawing their maps, because it's very easy to draw districts that ignore pre-existing community elements. And if the rules did not include that, there might be no redress for a split in half neighborhood that would rather be voting all together because they have a shared interest. And also cores of prior districts. This was an area of some contention during the debate process for LR 134. On one hand, this does a good job. If it was required to maintain the cores of prior districts, it would stop gigantic shifts in the legislative maps and maintain people's knowledge of what their district was. It would pretty much stay the same thing. We'd only shift minorly. It would protect in some ways also from gerrymandering when we're looking at both partisan and racial gerrymandering. But at this point, it is just considered, it's not required by the rules. So the committee can add that to their priorities when drawing districts, but it's not required of them. It is an optional thing at this point. And the last thing here I'll mention is that it bars the rules bar consideration of prior election results. So they can't go back and see how this area of the state voted and draw maps using that data. It also bars the use of data that gives them party registration. So they don't know, they will not be able to look at information basically that gives them partisan leanings, gives them partisan data. Any partisan data has been pretty well struck out, and it's only census data that they'll be relying on, which is the ideal, right? Worst types of redistricting and gerrymandering come along when other data sets find their way into the discussion. As long as they're sticking to solely census data, yes, it includes some racial demographics, it includes population data, but it doesn't include this partisan data that can be used to easily draw districts that favor one party or another. Final thing I wanted to cover, and I'm, as everybody else, happy to answer questions, the public transparency and access portions of this. So how do we engage in the process? How does the public get involved? First of all, there is a statutorily required 3 public meetings, one in each congressional district, where the committee will take community input. The format of those meetings should be roughly the same as a legislative hearing, as any other committee meeting. That is period for public testimony, roughly 3 to 5 minutes, right, depending upon turnout. But prior to those meetings, draft district maps will be released to the public so that you can review and then come in and comment on that. As of right now, we do not know the dates or locations of these meetings, or I should add the level of access beyond in-person testimony. A lot of other states have been utilizing or planning to utilize online methods of testimony, not just the viewing of the committee process, but allowing people to submit either comment through an online portal or actually through video teleconferencing at the committee. That is something we're asking of the committee, is to include digital methods so that we get the broadest participation possible. But as of right now, all we know is there'll be those 3 hearings in the 3 congressional districts. You can pretty well guarantee one will be in Lincoln, one will be in Omaha. The one in the 3rd district, I'm not 100% sure. There's a lot of different places and it's hard to put it in one spot. So we're also encouraging more meetings, the better. 3 meetings, especially for a district the size of 3, can be difficult. So we're hopeful that they give more opportunity for access than just 3 meetings where only public testimony will be taken. Another important transparency element is that the legislature's redistricting website, it's kind of empty at this moment. It gives you a little outline of what they plan to upload, but that's where we'll find, hopefully, the draft district maps as they're released. That's where we'll hopefully be able to access the data set that the legislature is using and get the announcements for when these meetings are, right, times, places, how we join. So that I would say, and the committee has pointed to this website as being their primary method of communicating with the community when it comes to redistricting. My final point here is, of course, that just that draft district maps are available, they have to be made available for public review. Beyond that, it's unclear of how broad the transparency of the committee will be in terms of committee communications, other work product that they create. We are asking for greater transparency. We think more data is better, but we know for sure only those draft maps will be made available. The census data set will be available, but it's yet to be seen how fully transparent and available the committee will be. These are the methods we've got at the moment. All right, I will stop share because that is the how-tos, or this is what we expect in Nebraska. This is what the process will look like. I am, like I said, happy to answer any questions or provide clarity, but that is the quick overview of what we're expecting.
Thank you so much, Gavin. And as we already said, we'll be sharing the presentation, but we'll also be keeping CSN members informed of the process and how you can be involved throughout the coming weeks. So any questions for Gavin? Okay. Anne.
Hi, Gavin. Thank you for that. I guess sort of real talk, how optimistic are you really that the committee might add a digital testimony component or add any additional meetings, or do you expect they're kind of going to do the bare minimum?
Okay, so there's 50-50 here. I am slightly hopeful that they will add some sort of digital methodology. There was a teleconferencing aspect 10 years ago. It's really hard for them to argue now that they can't implement, given our current methodologies of technical, anybody can get on anywhere. When it comes to more public meetings, I'm not very hopeful. Maybe I'll let Weston should also answer that question. I feel like he's got his own thoughts, but yeah, in terms of that online engagement, I think they'll make something available at least to watch. The biggest push, if you want to make a complaint, is allow us to submit testimony online too, especially for that 3rd district where people don't need to drive an hour or 2 just to be able to testify. But yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions of Gavin before we move on? Well, he queued you up well, Weston. Weston Miller from Civic Nebraska is going to talk about the legislative dynamics and what we can expect on that front. So Weston, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks for that transition, Gavin. So I don't have any slides. I just wanted to talk, frankly, for a minute about just kind of what we can actually expect in terms of the political dynamics that are at play in the next couple of weeks. I think Patrick in the chat really asked the question I want to address here, which is how does the process that Gavin outlined interact with the gerrymandering that Professor Dunbar outlined? How are those things all going to actually look? If there is one central source of conflict this year, and Lori at the beginning was correct, this is an inherently divisive partisan process. There is, I don't believe such a thing as nonpartisan redistricting. It's an inherently partisan activity, and our job is to mitigate as best as we can. The single source of conflict this year is going to be the phrase preserving rural representation. I know a lot of folks on this call were at the committee hearing for LR 134, the redistricting rules that we did adopt. The committee, which is a 5-4 committee, came with a set of rules that they had agreed upon. They were rules that I think were very fair. They were very comprehensive. They weren't perfect, but they were really, really good. So I think a lot of us thought this is no sweat. At the committee hearing, there was a pretty concerted, scripted effort among testifiers to say, hey, we need to make some important changes. Otherwise, we are going to destroy rural representation in the Nebraska legislature. Now, as the previous presenters have already clarified, that risk is legitimate, and it's because of population shifts, right? There's been a significant shift in the last 10 years of population from rural to Douglas, Lancaster, Sarpy County, very significant. And that should, by all measures, result in a shift in representation. Not all Republicans and not all rural representatives, but the majority of both of those groups have said, this is a problem, it's a problem we need to fix. They said that preserving rural representation is going to be the utmost important thing. The way they're going to do that has been identified already by Gavin. So LR 134, the original version, included language about preserving the core of prior districts. And again, to reiterate what that actually means is it says the historical goal of that rule is to say, hey, you can't have a sitting senator who all of a sudden their district doesn't exist anymore. So they're just out of a job. Like, they're trying to prevent that from happening. It's also very important for consistency, right? So right now I live in District 13. And the idea of that rule is that District 13, it's certainly going to change, but it should look roughly the same as it did before. I shouldn't wake up after a district like, wow, what district am I in? I can't even tell. It's not even close to different. So we're trying to value consistency over creativity. What happened in the committee hearing, which was then adopted by the whole body, is that language of preserving the core of prior districts was a requirement, and insofar as possible, was changed to we will allow for the preservation of the core of prior districts, which is the same as not making it a rule at all. There's a lot of conversation both in committee and in the legislature that because we have this new language of preserving communities of interest, we don't even need to worry about this core of prior districts. But as everyone has said so far, community of interest is an important but increasingly vague and debatable term, which again, in the context of redistricting, is not a great thing. That's my one takeaway, is that creativity in redistricting is bad. We want consistency. We don't want creativity. That's probably the only part of my life where I think that, but we are not interested in artistic expression in forms of redistricting. So what does this mean because of this change? So Professor Dunbar identified a couple rules that are non-negotiable, right? They've been established by the state constitution, by the US Constitution, by the Supreme Court. Those rules are extremely important. Unfortunately, those rules also allow for an incredible amount of creativity within the confines of those rules. And I appreciate Dr. Dunbar identifying that all of those bad looking maps that he identified are all very legal and would all survive a court challenge in most cases, because they are contiguous, they are compact-ish, they aren't explicitly, racially gerrymandered, they aren't even explicitly partisan gerrymandered, a lot of folks would argue, which makes them legal. That of course doesn't make them good. What this means for us realistically, and I think the central point of concern is Lincoln, Nebraska, to be blunt. Everything is up for grabs if we are not preserving the cores of prior districts. And there have been a lot of senators who have been very clear that they will pretty much do whatever it takes to make sure that rural representation is not reduced in Nebraska, despite the shift in population. Now, I think just because it hasn't been said yet, it should be, I guess, kind of plainly stated that the whole purpose of redistricting, right, is to make sure that your representation is proportional to the number of people who live in your state. And in theory, it's supposed to represent where people live in that state. So if 56% of your population lives in 3 counties, then in theory, 56% of your representatives should come from those 3 counties. By removing this protection, this core of prior districts rule, which did exist in 2011, it was a hard, fast rule last time. By getting rid of this rule, we are allowing for maximum creativity. So what this could mean, and I'm just going to give absurd examples that hopefully won't happen, but absolutely could in this situation. You could take the city of Lincoln, which I think is divided into 6 or 7 districts right now. you could divide it into 20, no problem. You take a sliver of West Lincoln and you stretch it all the way out to either Grand Island, or you could loop around and loop it in with North Platte. And then you take a sliver of East Lincoln and connect it to West Omaha, or you take a sliver of North Lincoln and connect it to whatever is north of North Lincoln. Like you can get as creative as you want to. There is no rule that is clearly defined that says you can't divide up a city. Now, if that city were really small, we have a really strong argument, because one of the most common conceptions of a community of interest is a small town, right? So that's really easy to understand. So we're not going to divide up small towns because it's a clear community. Lincoln is too big to be its own district. Omaha is too big to be its own district. So those have to be divided up anyway. So once we've crossed that threshold, we're really lacking protections right now to figure out what are the limits, what is acceptable, what is not. So I guess that's the dynamic I want folks to be most aware of. The central point of conflict, again, preserving rural representation. The question that we're going to address over the next several weeks is, how do you do that? How do you preserve rural representation? Now, of course, it is, I think, intellectually dishonest to say that anyone in the legislature is trying to eradicate rural representation. There are going to be plenty of rural senators. I shouldn't say plenty. I guess that's the word that's up for debate. There will be several rural senators, no matter how this shakes out. The question is, should rural representation reflect rural population, or are there other values at play? Those other values haven't really been articulated, but there's clearly some force that says we need to make sure the balance stays roughly like it is now. We can't let the legislature get too urban, is a phrase we're going to hear several times, which has a lot of layers to it that I'm not going to unpack on a recorded Zoom call. So those are the things to keep in mind. There are a number of rumors circulating about some really gross particular plans. I'm not going to get into those because they are all just rumors, but if anybody wants to chat about it, I'd be happy to. I do think, and I think kind of maybe this is what's going to be addressed in the rest of this call, our best bet at contributing positively to this vague definition war we're about to get into is we need to do everything we can to present a crystal clear definition of what a community of interest actually is. Because I can tell you with absolute certainty, the legislature has no idea what a community of interest is. They were pretty open about that in their floor discussion about LR 134. There are some districts where there's some sections of it that are pretty clear, like District 8, where I used to live. Like it's Benson and Dundee. Like those are two neighborhoods that are pretty cohesive. And you can generally say, like, if you divided Dundee into 5 districts, that would be weird and unusual. But there's a lot of districts where there's no clear marker of like, yes, this is my community. The legislature is going to have to tackle questions like, can communities be based on race? Can communities be based on age? Are they based on activity? And it's really unclear. So I think I'll stop there. Happy to answer any questions, but that's the thing we're about to fight about for the next couple of weeks.
Thank you, Weston. Kamara, you have a question?
Yeah, it's Kimara.
I'm sorry.
And that's okay. I wanted to ask, when you say neighborhoods, do you mean, like, for instance, neighborhood associations are registered with the city and they have specific boundaries that are also indicated as well? Is that what you mean when you say neighborhoods? Are those included?
They can and probably should be. They're not necessarily. I think that's maybe part of our job, is to make sure the legislature understands, like, hey, we have a neighborhood association that goes from this street to this street. This is how it's cohesive. This is how it's meaningful. Here are the consequences of maybe dividing up our neighborhood into several districts. I think those are the kinds of conversations we want to push on the legislature, because right now there is a disturbing amount of, well, gosh, there's just no way to tell, like, what's a community of interest? And that, to me, is a big red flag.
So then my next question is, the storytelling piece, like when it comes to public comment, right? How, in your opinion, how important do you think that will be? And if it's high, then I think that neighborhood associations, which are typically pretty organized, could play a piece in, like, the advocacy part of that, and also in showing up for public comment.
Yeah, I would say very important. As far as what to do about it, I'm going to put a pin in that because I think Gavin's going to come back to that at the end. But in general, extremely important. And yes, I think that getting neighborhood associations involved directly to offer some of those definitions is going to be a huge deal.
Thank you, Weston. Any other questions for Weston?
I saw something in the chat.
Lori, we'll get to your question too. I think Gavin and Creighton will speak to that a little bit more directly about the phrase community of interest and what it means more specifically. Thank you so much, Weston. Really
Actually,
helpful.
I'm sorry. Oh, I was.
Yes, I'm sorry, Corbin, go ahead.
Oh, no worries, Lisa. So Weston, when it comes to organizing with people, how are going to be the best ways to show those communities of interest in a tangible way that will let the committee know that these exist, where they are? Is this going to be story collecting? Is this going to be setting up like one-on-one meetings? Like if we get our Sarpy County group to meet with Carol Blood about, hey, these are the specific neighborhoods that we have here. If we get our South Omaha group to meet with other senators, like, is that what we're looking at as strategy? Can you speak to any of that?
Sure. Answer to all
Well,
of
Creighton will also be speaking to it too, but Weston, go ahead, and then I know Creighton will be speaking to it directly.
For sure. No, and that's what I was going to say is I wanted to highlight the work that I think Gavin and Creighton are doing to collect those stories, because they have been putting in a lot of time to make sure that, because you're right, because someone has to collect and deliver, because as Gavin correctly identified, this process is not going, it's not accessible ever. It's especially not accessible this year, where there's all sorts of time crunches that will be used as excuses to accelerate processes and shorten testimonies and all that kind of stuff. So yes, every example you gave is extremely important. I think Gavin and Creighton are going to come back and talk about how they can kind of be the facilitators for some of those conversations.
Great, thank you. And then Toba, I see you have a question in the chat. I'm hoping Creighton and Gavin can speak to that when we get to that section, but I want to be mindful of time and turn it over to Sherry St. Clair from the League of Women Voters, we're sort of going to pivot to the next part of our conversation about how you can get involved. So more of the participatory part of the redistricting process. So Sherry, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I am opening up share screen, and as you can all see, on my laptop, my PowerPoint subscription has expired, so you don't get the fancy slides, but you'll get the basics of what I'm talking about here. I think everybody knows League's been around for a long time. We started out advocating for the right to vote, but following the Rucho decision, the League launched a nationwide campaign, People Powered Fair Maps, because partisan and racial gerrymandering is voter suppression. And this is something that the League has always been opposed to, and we want people to get involved and knowledgeable about this. In Nebraska, we have developed a program that we're calling Meant to Represent. The reason that we've developed this educational effort is because in Nebraska, people are part of the process. The process was outlined, but as you can see, somewhere along the line, we do get the opportunity to provide input. It would be nice if we had opportunity to provide input, more upstream and on a more frequent basis than kind of at the last minute. But yeah, as the other speakers have pointed out, this is kind of what we're stuck with now. So as a League, we've created materials that fall into basically 3 buckets: publicity, videos, and presentations. We have created brochures, posters, action sheets, identifying what people can do. We have some videos that have been put out there on YouTube already, Dine and Discuss about redistricting. We created a game show that's out there, a presentation called Meant to Represent, as well as the Meant to Represent presentation that includes an overview of District R, the community mapping thing that Creighton will get into a little bit more later. We have PowerPoints and we have scripts in both English and Spanish on Meant to Represent. And we have a long version and a short version. And then the Who's Line game show that we've actually done a couple of times with some groups that really seem to like it. We have identified a number of actions that can be taken by people. These include, of course, contacting the policymakers, call, writing, emailing, your senators, attending events, attending our Meant to Represent workshops, attending the programs that Common Cause is putting on. We are planning to have a day of action on September 18th, kind of midway through this process. And so there'll be more information about this later. Just visible presence for the senators and public officials to know that people are active and engaged and involved in this process. We want people to attend the public hearings. We want people, certainly welcome to join the League. Anybody's welcome to join the League. And certainly follow advocacy groups, Common Cause, Redistricting Network, follow information that's out there on things like Princeton Gerrymandering Project, Ballotopedia, those sorts of things. Talk to your friends and family, use the internet and social media. All these groups have well-developed websites with tons of information. And there's also a lot of coordination amongst the various groups. For example, this afternoon, the League of Voters US nationally is doing a Twitter storm in conjunction with the Campaign Legal Center. So there's gonna be a lot of information floating around out there on Twitter and Facebook pages. Again, contact policymakers, attend public hearings. If you want to have a Met to Represent presentation, we're happy to do that. We've done several in the Omaha area to enhance awareness there. We have one already scheduled in Seward. We have one scheduled in North Platte. It's a little bit harder to get people engaged, once you get outside of the Lincoln Omaha area, but we're certainly willing to travel if necessary because your voice is important and a necessary part of our democracy.
Thank you so much, Sherry. Sherry, I dropped the link that you shared with me a couple of weeks ago with the hub of resources from the League. And we'll also be sharing your deck. So encourage all of you to follow Sherry's recommendations to be involved. Next, we're going to go back to Gavin and Creighton Hofer from the Common Cause. Creighton has done a ton of work on communities of interest and can really speak to some of the dynamics. He's also going to encourage you to sign up for some of the events he has going on. So Creighton, I'll turn it over to you first, yeah?
Yes, thank you, Lisa. Yeah, like mentioned, I'm Creighton Hofer. I'm the field organizer with Common Cause Nebraska. And I'm going to just do a brief overview of what we have for our community mapping program and give you an idea of what that would look like for your organization if you would like to get involved. So I'm going to share my screen quick. Okay. So hopefully to help address some folks' questions from earlier, our kind of approach to figuring out how to present to the legislature that there are areas of concern and interest is by doing what's called community mapping. And so community mapping is essentially an organizing approach to this topic. So what we're doing is encouraging community members, organizations, and neighborhood associations to host events where they get people from an area to attend. We've been doing them on Zoom just due to COVID, but if they're in, and I would kind of foresee that being the case, but basically doing this over Zoom using a mapping software called Redistricting, which I'll show you a little bit of here in a second. But basically what we end up kind of doing is we first have an education component of kind of making sure people that aren't aware of what redistricting is, they kind of get their head around what it is. And then after that, we talk through how that might affect their community. So thinking about like, what are some practical areas that define the community? Like, what are the general values? What are the places that are frequented, that kind of thing. And then we actually sit down using Redistricting and map out where that is. And then we have that as a actual saved point. So we're talking to people just literally about where they live and what they feel like makes up their community. And we're really doing it from a like very general, non-political, non-partisan perspective. It's really just like, who are the people that you know around you? Who are the people that are important to you? And then actually mapping that out and going, okay, where does that actually exist on a map in Nebraska? So we do that, yeah, like I said, with districtr.org. It's a free mapping software. Anyway, you can get on after this and check it out for yourself. I've got a couple just screenshots of what that looks like. but it's a fairly simple tool to use as far as its layout and kind of what you're able to do with it. But yeah, so this will be like, if you go to the website, this is what it looks like. And so we would go to draw communities, but we are also able to draw districts, which is something that we'll also be kind of looking into, of making a separate map just to have for comparison's sake to what the legislature will be presenting. But this is kind of what it looks like. It's a pretty basic setup, but there are some nice things that for your organization, if you are kind of like me and a little bit of a data nerd, you have some ability to look at some different population breakdowns. Now, this data, I will say, is based off of the 2010 census results, as Gavin mentioned earlier. The legacy data for the 2020 census is just getting released today. So not 100% sure whether or not the District-R software is going to have a full update, but at the very least, we're kind of using this just more as an engagement way of, as a way to engage folks. And so like I kind of described, so when after we kind of do the first part of the event where we kind of go through what redistricting is and talk about the general values and kind of talk through where people feel like their neighborhood or community lies, then this is where we can actually shade in parts of the map that we all everyone at an event kind of agrees upon. And then we can have that saved for future reference as a data point. So I guess the biggest thing that for your takeaway would just be, how can your organization get involved? We just ask that you host an event. So, I mean, since we're kind of a small statewide organization, we need partners that have kind of good relationships with folks in communities and neighborhoods. And that's kind of where some of our nonprofit partners come in, just because there's a lot of direct service providers, and we want to be as mindful of folks' communities as far as like the relationships they have, so that's kind of where your organization can play a part of. You can kind of be the host and talk to the people that you know, either within your organization or within your community. I am totally willing to be on for that event and run the District-R part of things, or I can also train to use it. So I do have 2 dates for next week that if you kind of want to know more information on this, or if you want to have a full training, I'll be doing those next week. And I'll have a Google form sign up that I'll put in the chat after this. But I can also find another time that works, just because we still do have plenty of time to host one of these events before the legislature kind of comes back in. So be more than willing to help accommodate and make things easy. It's just we just need as many people as possible to kind of get involved in this. And then this can kind of be our way of re-engaging people then when it comes time for those testimonies. Then we kind of have a good basis for a group of people that are knowledgeable on the topic now, and they now know like what they want out of their testimony, kind of know how to approach it and talk about their community to the committee. So
Thank
I
you,
will
Creighton.
be glad to take any questions now.
Kimara has a question.
I do, 2 of them actually. The first one is, what's the latest date that you suggest for a group of people to have the presentation? And then does it have to be a maximum of 15 people? Because I'm really thinking about the Alliance persona. And I know we have more people than that, but we do have a meeting at the very beginning of September.
Yeah, the number can be more. That's just kind of like, we try to get at least that many, so that way we're not just getting a couple specific, like we kind of want to make sure like it's a general consensus for one of these. You're not just getting like 6 very opinionated people. And then I would say up to that, when the legislature reconvenes, on September, I think it's 13th is when the speaker had announced. But I'm wanting to try to do them all the way up to that point, just because the more of these we can have, the more possible participants as far as testimony goes, but also then too, we just have more data points to kind of point to for communities of interest.
And then one more question. How long do you anticipate like the presentation being with questions?
Oh, are you talking for the training or for an event?
For the, what you were just talking about, for the mapping.
Yeah. Usually they go, for the ones I've done, they usually take about an hour. Like, and I also do have and we can kind of cover this too, if you do want to attend the training, but I do have like that presentation education component as well, as part of it. So like, essentially you can, like, as long as you want to run it, I have a bunch of materials that you can use and also adapt and kind of edit on your own as well.
Great, thank you. Creighton, you'll add the sign up into the chat as well as your email address, because I suspect a number of people would be eager to reach out. Sherry, did you want to add something as well?
Yeah, I will offer this as well. We can do the trainings as well. The league is doing some of these, and Tamara, if your group is in Omaha, we have a couple people in Omaha that are available also.
Amazing, incredible. Thank you so much. Any other questions for Creighton or for Sherry? In fact, I realized, Sherry, I didn't seek any questions for you, so my apologies there. Okay. All right. Let's, Gavin, I know you wanted to add a few words about how organizations can be involved, and then I'm going to turn it over to Melissa from the state table. So Gavin?
Yeah, I'll be quick. Thank you. So a few points I wanted to just clarify on what Creighton said. So first of all, when it comes to this District R software, they will be getting an update at some point here using the 2020 census data. That I don't think we would have chosen them as our software if it wasn't. So there will be updated data in there. Don't have to worry about it being out of date. It's just out of date right now. So once we all have this legacy data processed, it'll be plugged in there. The other thing I wanted to kind of highlight out of this is, yes, we're gathering these maps. We are also looking at helping people create testimony from them, basically preparing them as packaged things in a way, right? A neighborhood association goes through. We're not going to leave them with nothing. Our hope is to circle back with everybody we work with, help them create testimony from these maps that they can then submit to the committee itself. It's like I said, it's beyond just creating it, but we want to have that follow-up as well with everyone we work with to get as much feedback to the committee as possible. Last thing I'll say here, and it's just answering a question from the chat real quick. We talked about school districts, all of that. Well, at the highest level, yes, the State Board of Education will be redistricted. All those will be covered, but when it comes to local, we're talking Omaha, Lincoln, that will come down to yes, there will be redistricting of those seats, but those rules come down to the individual areas. All local authorities have their own redistricting rules, so I would encourage you to ask maybe someone who knows more, but I don't have an index of how every single small area is going to redistrict as much as I'd like to, but they will be redistricted. So be aware of it, and I'd say start asking questions now of the people who are going to make choices, because I hope they're thinking about it. That's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thanks, Gavin. Great. Any other questions for Gavin, Creighton, or Sherry? Okay. Great. And you can see in the chat that Creighton has dropped a link to the training that he, if you want to sign up for that, he also has made his email address available. Please reach out to him to get anything set up. Now we're going to talk about how your organization can communicate about redistricting. Again, a lot of this is in flux, but Melissa from the state table, who I'm sure all of you know, is going to talk about some of the resources that are available. I know also, Sherry has said, is an evangelist about making the resources from the league available as well. But some specific angles for messaging. So Melissa, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I will just share my screen here shortly. So hopefully, can you see my slide deck? Does that look okay? All right, great. Well, thank you everyone so much for being here today, and thank you to all the previous presenters. I've learned a lot already and just really appreciate. So I just want to share a little bit today to share a little bit about resources that are available from the table and some ways that we can help your organization and communities get involved in redistricting work. So as many of you know, the table does offer our members a number of resources and tools to help you engage in your communities. And these tools can absolutely be used to educate and mobilize around redistricting too. So for example, we can help with communication support as Lisa mentioned, and I'm going to dig into that a little bit more as we go, along with tools like text banking and phone banking. We also do have some regranting dollars that are available specifically for redistricting work, and that can be used for things like canvassing, community events, or other organizing work. So if you'd like to discuss any of these opportunities, please do reach out to us at the table. And I also do want to share some specific resources around communications today to help you prepare for the data release. Again, that's happening. The Census Bureau is doing their press call today at noon our time. So there will be a lot of coverage coming out soon. And I just wanted to make sure that if
how you doing, honey?
Okay.
All right, we'll get that person on mute. Thank you.
Okay. No problem. So I just wanted to make sure that if anybody is looking for some resources right away, that you have something in hand that you can use. And we're going to talk a little bit about a toolkit that's available to you. But again, I know Sherry shared a lot of amazing resources from the League. I would also encourage you to absolutely use those or any other partner organizations. There's going to be a lot of us who have great materials available. So please use whatever is appropriate. If you have something lined up in your own work, please use that. This is just here as a resource if it is helpful for you. The toolkit that I'm about to share a little bit from, it's called the Stakeholder Data Release Toolkit. And it was created and shared by our partners at Fair Representation and Redistricting and Charge. And Charge is a coalition that is co-sponsored by our national affiliate State Voices. I believe that Common Cause's national affiliate and other organizations have also been involved in that coalition work. So some of you may have already seen some of these pieces. So this toolkit includes some core messaging, some strategic guidance around communications work, some background on redistricting, just so that all of the information that you need to help communicate is there. It also includes talking points, templates for media outreach, like a media advisory, press release, and then social media drafts too. And so I keep talking about this toolkit. I'm going to share a link in the chat with you so that you can also see it. And
Melissa, I can do that quick.
Awesome, thank you, because
Yep.
I've got a lot of tabs going. I appreciate that. So just to bring out a few talking points that, again, if it's helpful for you, please use them. If it's not, feel free to move along to your own, and that's great. But a few things, that you can use is just pointing out that today is the official start of the first stage in the redistricting process. And one thing that I think we can continue to come back to is the idea that no matter our color, background, or zip code, voters should pick their leaders and not the other way around. So again, voters should pick their leaders and not the other way around. And of course, the districts that we draw this year are going to shape our lives and our communities for the next decade. There's a number of other talking points here. I won't go through them all just in the interest of time, but they are in the toolkit beginning on page 3, I think. But there's also a lot of other key messaging that can be helpful for you in there. So again, it's a super quick overview, but as a reminder, please do reach out to us if you're interested in setting up a text or a phone bank. If you'd like more information about any of this, or if you'd like some regranting support to talk over comms strategy, anything, we're here for you. And my email is here on the slide. It's melissa@nebraskatable.org. And you can also, of course, contact us through our help desk, which is this bit.ly link here. But that's it. Does anyone have any questions before I hand it back over to Lisa?
Any questions for Melissa? Thank you so much, Melissa.
Thank you.
Such a great resource. Folks, we dropped that link into the chat, and we'll also follow up with an email so you have that, that incredible resource. Okay. Well, I wanted just to open it up with the last few minutes that we have, and with such a lively discussion. I was just, we were originally, I should back up, we were originally planning to do this meeting in person. After we had our organizing conversation, we realized that we would be better off doing this by Zoom because of changes with the coronavirus and the Delta variant. And we had planned on spending some time, if we were in person, hearing from you all about how you would like to be involved or how your organization can be involved. And so with the couple of minutes we have left, I just invite all of you to sort of reflect on if and how your organization can be involved. And if you're inclined to share that, maybe inspire a few of your colleagues with some ideas. So does anybody want to talk about how your organization is potentially thinking about sharing information about redistricting with your supporters and being involved? Corbin. Thank you.
So we are going to be doing a Train the Trainer event at Heartland Worker Center next Friday. Then we're going to be going to our each individual core teams, and we're getting every single organizer from the Heartland Worker Center involved in this. So that's going out into Grand Island. It's going out into Schuyler. It's going to be in Bellevue, La Vista, Papillion. It's going to be in North Omaha, South Omaha, and our West Omaha groups. We're a group out in Fremont as well. And I think the takeaway from this is trying to just get down what their community of interest groups are and what their communities look like. And I'm super excited that we had this, and I'm excited for the work we're going to be doing going forward, training our core teams.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Corbin. Great to hear. Sherry, this might be a question for you or Gavin, I'm not sure. Are there sample letters to send to the redistricting committee?
We've thought about sample letters, but really it's more impactful if letters are individual. If the committee members get a bunch of identical letters, it loses its impact tremendously. What I would suggest people do is look at some of the redistricting websites and pick out what is important to them. Is it most important to you that your neighborhood, on the east side of 34th Street, for example, stays contiguous? Reflect that back to your senators. If it's important to you, whatever part of this is important to you, you need to include that in the letter. It's people, the people, not politicians, is an important concept. I think that's important to get across to your senators, that this is a process that should be driven by the citizens of the state, not by party leaders, that sort of thing. So you have to kind of choose your message. It doesn't have to be a long letter. A sentence or two is sufficient to get your point across. You don't need to write a thesis.
Great, thank you so much, Sherry. And Carol, also I would just encourage you to look at that resource toolkit, messaging toolkit that Melissa shared. Corbin, did I see you had your hand up again?
Oh no, Sherry answered the question I was going to ask.
Okay, great, thank you so much. Any other, does anybody else want to weigh in on how they're planning to be involved? I'm sure a number of you are thinking about it. Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us, and a special thank you to our presenters, Dr. Dunbar, Gavin and Creighton from Common Cause, Sherry from the League, Weston from Civic Nebraska, and Melissa from the State Table. Thank you so much. We will share all of these resources with you as quickly as we can. It should be, I would say, buckle up and get ready for a very fast moving process, and be ready to pivot at a moment's notice, to be involved and make your voice heard. So thank you all, and we'll be in touch soon. If in the coming weeks we feel like a second meeting is necessary, we did propose a follow-up meeting once we know more. So be on the lookout for that conversation, that meeting invite, as we move through this process. Thank you so much. Have a great Thursday.